Thank you, Beth, and my colleague also, João Bellenhorf from the SCI, and we are the three of us are the Sustainable Environment Institute, and we have a special guest for you today. And we're very happy to actually have had Marta Segura here before. I won't say exactly a year ago, but it was in fact for the a very special event on urban heat. And in that case, we looked at the problems of heat stroke and people being affected, their health affected, and of course the death rate. Today we'll be visiting that to some extent, but we're with a real focus on urban equity, that is on the uneven impacts of urban heat on urban populations when it comes to, well, we'll see. That's exactly where we're going with this. So click. This is, in fact, part of a series for the fall for this starting today. We rescheduled Marta Segura for today on, so this is September 28th and October 19th. We'll have authors of Unequal Exposure to Heat Waves in Los Angeles, Impact of Uneven Green Spaces. These are Caltech researchers that have done a lot of very valuable work in providing the data that we all need in order to better understand this crisis. October 24th, 25th, and 26th is Climate Palooza at West LA College. And we also have on November 14th, Dina Gilla Whitaker, who will be actually presenting her book at West LA College. So this is the series, and we are very happy to be kicking it off today with this very special visit, because we actually have had the pleasure, I mentioned to you, of having had Marta here well over a year ago. That particular seminar is actually hosted on our website. It's August 18th, 2022. It was just called Heat, and you can see that there is a recording of that as well as a series of articles and reports, and you can find that on our website under Teaching Resources. So today we want to raise awareness of extreme heat risk and solutions, and the constituents and peers, which is a chief heat officer. There are maybe 10 chief heat officers today that are in cities like Athens and Greece and Sydney, Australia, but very importantly in American cities like Phoenix and Miami and New York City. The Climate Equity LA is in fact the organization for which Marta works. This is a bit too much text for a slide, but it's important to see that she has quite an extensive track record in environmental health. She has a master's in public health, and she can address, from many disciplinary points of view, the problem of urban heat. So it's a real, it's a pleasure to have her, and it's wonderful to have someone who is that knowledgeable from a variety of approaches, not just urban planning, tree cover, but also public health impacts.
Climate change turns up the background thermostat on what was already intense summer heat and kicks it up an extra notch.
One study found that within 30 years, the heat island effect will raise city temperatures an additional 50% of whatever they experience from climate change. So if the city experiences 2 degrees of climate change warming, they can also expect an extra degree from urban heat.
We are on a pathway to global warming of more than double 1.5 degree limited within Paris. Climate scientists warn that we are already perilously close to tipping points that could lead to cascading and irreversible climate impacts.
So the attention overdue, but it really does underline the fact that as we become a more urban species, a larger percentage of human beings are actually exposed to this problem of the urban heat island. In this case, this is the New York City chief heat officer, and I think Marta Segura has just come back from New York, so she might have had interesting conversations with her colleagues in other cities. Every city really has its unique challenges. In the case of New York, they also have to worry about floods. And what measures they take actually depend a whole lot on the populations most affected, particularly the unhoused. The record streak that we witnessed in Phoenix this last year did go on for a month, 31 days, every day above 110 degrees Fahrenheit. That is a record even for Phoenix. And it did really present challenges for people working out on trying to reach people in distress with water, with shelter, with cooling centers, and Marta will elaborate on that when we talk about what is LA doing in that connection.
We are in Phoenix, Arizona, talking about the scorching heat. Now, it's not just here in Arizona, but we're outside of Valley Wise Hospital, where they're talking about an influx in patients suffering from all kinds of heat-related illnesses. We're talking about heat stroke. We're talking about heat exhaustion, as well as third-degree burns.
The heat wave in Arizona is on track to break the previous record of 18 straight days of temperature surpassing 110 degrees Fahrenheit in Phoenix. Extreme heat now kills more people in the United States than any other extreme weather. Some of those most at risk include people who work outdoors, as well as unhoused people. All this comes as a UN climate change report found the Earth could pass a dangerous temperature threshold in the next decade that could make climate disasters so extreme we will not be able to adapt unless urgent action is taken to reduce carbon emissions. For more, we're joined by longtime climate reporter Jeff Goodell, whose new book is just out, titled "The Heat Will Kill You First: Life and Death on a Scorched Planet." He says he decided to write it after he walked for 10 blocks in Phoenix on a 115-degree Fahrenheit day and nearly passed out, making him realize he'd radically underestimated the dangers of extreme heat.
Heat is the primary driver for this climate transformation that we're undergoing right now. It is this invisible force that is changing our world.
Jeff Goodell, you write about what happens to our bodies as the heat rises above 107 degrees Fahrenheit. You say as the heat rises, the proteins unfold and the bonds that keep the structures together break. At the most fundamental level, your body unravels. Your insides melt and disintegrate. You're hemorrhaging everywhere.
That is, in fact, what extreme heat stroke looks like at temperatures above 107 degrees. So Phoenix at 110 is quite significant. There's also the dimension that is being looked at, particularly in cities like New York and Los Angeles, the effect that extreme heat has on people's mental well-being. And it doesn't have to be a person who's already challenged with mental illness. It's, as it puts it here, it singes the mind, not just the body. Increases in statistics show increases of violence, of suicide, of many very destabilizing experiences. This happens for people who are otherwise might be doing quite well. So this is the extent to which heat can really represent a major change for even those of us who don't have already changes. But you can see it complicates drug treatment. It is, in fact, a stressor all of its own.
Urban heat islands affect human health and it affects energy consumption. Those two things alone are enough to drive worldwide interest.
When we build an urban area, we're replacing the vegetated surface and also the soil surface with this impervious surface like the paving material and the building material. By doing this, we're basically warming the urban areas, and this will generate a temperature difference, and that's we call it the urban heat island. We find out that the urban heat island affected by several factors. The first factor will be the surrounding ecological context, and then will be the size of the city. We're talking about size, we mean both the area of the city and also the population size of the city. And then there will be the shape of the city and also the development patterns of the city.
We used a variety of satellite data, both land surface temperature data from MODIS and also impervious surface data from the Landsat satellite. Impervious surface data is essentially tells us how much building material is on the land surface in order to study the urban heat island. The urban heat island is much larger if you convert a forested area into an urban area. And this is because the urban heat island is a relative measure. So urban areas and forests are much warmer than the surrounding landscape than they are in deserts, for example, because the surrounding landscape is already warm. I think the general public should be interested in urban heat islands because of the fact that it's where most of the people live. And in the next 50 years, we're going to see 80% of the global population living in cities. And the urban heat island matters for everything from health like asthma and heart conditions, to how much heating and air conditioning you need to use to cool or heat your living space.
So people in government who are trying to mitigate these extremes have various approaches, but the most significant dimension or variable in all of these things is income. And that is working class communities, communities that are in Los Angeles. We're talking about communities that are mostly people of color, that lack trees, that lack that cooling effect. And as you probably know, just from this last summer, the differences between a tree-lined boulevard or neighborhood on the west side of LA and what might be the experience downtown when it's 110 degrees might be as much as even 20 degrees difference. So addressing the heat island effect and addressing the challenges it has for public health is really tailored to, as we just saw, you know, what are the features of the city you live in. For example, in Los Angeles, we don't worry that much about humidity, but other cities that have, like Miami, that have high levels of heat might also really have high levels of humidity, and that's a completely unique challenge to public health experts as they approach that affected population. We will be upcoming sharing with you the work that's been done at Caltech that actually measures for the city of Los Angeles what are the median household income, and as this correlates with land surface temperatures. And you can see that there are spatial patterns for Los Angeles based on income and on degrees Celsius, with the, of course, the Antelope Valley, Lancaster, Palmdale registering some of the highest temperatures, but not to be left out, our downtown area is also. This has a lot to do with the ability of cities to absorb heat. Asphalt is dark, it absorbs heat. Rooftops of buildings are often tar papered, they absorb heat. Large parking lots with lots of automobiles reflect and absorb a lot of heat. All of that contributes to this phenomenon of the heat island. So in that way, we actually have to find ways to address that through, for example, tree planting. The EPA did put out a heat islands and equity report. All of these will be shared with all of you on our website. So these articles that I've been showing you will appear there, as well as any kind of recent government reports. So with that, I want to now I want to say just one more thing before hopefully Marta is here, and that is that there's two things we want you all to do, those of you who are attending. One is that if you are faculty, we have a survey that we've been running since opening day, which we intend to run through the month of October. We're getting good feedback on that survey. It is, in fact, on the homepage of seilaccd.net, and you can click on the survey, and there it will guide you to whether you're faculty or staff. You'll also can check in the chat. Beth and Zhao are monitoring the chat and providing those links there. In addition to that, we also have a poll, which we want to take. And before you log off, it's short, it's actually in the Zoom, in order to help us evaluate what we're able to accomplish in this series, and how we can best address what faculty might be interested in for future topic areas. So with this particular flyer, today's flyer, I'm going to stop the share, and it's very nice to see that we in fact have quite a turnout today. It looks like, and so let me just allow Beth or Zhao to mention what is going on in the chat. Let's see, we have it says that Marta's not here yet. So I actually have a lot of material. As you probably might imagine, a lot of research goes into these topic areas, particularly if it's something that is new and kind of newsworthy and groundbreaking. So we spend time researching these topics, finding the appropriate articles, the video clips, the interviews, so that today, after Marta is on her presentation, we have an interview that she carried out with the Aspen Institute. It's 13 minutes long. It'll be our outro, where she addresses the whole issue of equity regarding urban heat. Zhao has also put in the survey again to please fill that out. It's important to us, of course. as would be the poll. So I see
George,
Marta is
Marta is here. Yeah.
Yes, if you want to spotlight her, that would be nice. And that way we won't see boxes with names. Thank you so much, Marta Segura, for being able to participate in today's discussion. You might have been able to see some of the intro material, but we really wanted to situate today's discussion in that context of what is an urban heat island, and particularly in Los Angeles. So feel free, there will be maybe questions in the chat, and Beth and Zhao will look at the chat to see if there's questions that you might be able to answer while we have you for, I think, half an hour. So I'll shut up and turn it over to you. Thank you, Marta Segura.
Thank you, George, and thank you all for inviting me and having me here today. I really appreciate the opportunity to have this dialogue with you. So for, as most of you probably are aware, extreme heat is our primary climate hazard for the city of Los Angeles, and a little over a year ago, I believe that's why the city council designated me as chief heat officer. I was already the director of climate emergency mobilization, but really through investigative reporting and the LA Times, it brought it to the attention of the city council that we were having excessive premature deaths during heat waves, and we were also having excess emergency room visits, and predominantly in low-income neighborhoods that lack air conditioning throughout the city of LA. And that is definitely unacceptable. But it's not disconnected to this city and many cities' historical disinvestment of these communities, and not just historical disinvestment of these communities, but historical disinvestment to address the climate changes and the climate issues that face us today, and that have been facing us, frankly, for the last 30, 40 years or so. So what is an urban heat island? For me, the way that I like to describe it is what we have in the inner city, where we have eliminated nature, eliminated trees, eliminated vegetation, and the opportunity to have an ecosystem that is natural, nature-based, and actually helps reduce the temperature, right, for the micro region and the microclimate. But we particularly need it in the inner city, where there's so much concrete, so much pavement, so many tall buildings, that when the heat hits these buildings that have surfaces basically that radiate a lot of energy and a lot of heat, then the temperature becomes unbearable, and it's often 10 to 30 degrees hotter than an area where we have some vegetation. And that's really one aspect of an urban heat island. So what we want to look at are places within our city, within the region, that have integrated nature, and have integrated tree canopy, and have integrated natural systems that help reduce the urban heat. And really, the heat is a catalyst and an exacerbation of climate change. We have other types of freak weather now, or extreme weather, but in Los Angeles, this is the most costly, and this is the most deadly, and this is the most dangerous climate hazard that we have. And that's why I think we're putting such an exclamation mark on it, and why I was designated chief heat officer. But I am not working alone. I work as a village with many other departments, many other bureaus, many other jurisdictions. And that's the way we should be working on all climate issues, right? It's a multi-jurisdictional issue, multi-departmental issue. And that's especially true when we think about the low-income neighborhoods that lack vegetation and tree canopy, solar panels, electric vehicle charging stations, and everything that would potentially reduce the energy burden of those neighborhoods and also cool them down. I also like to talk about accountability, and how a city, large or small, can create better accountability to ensure that the solutions that we're investing in are having an impact. And what I've been talking about, and maybe a little bit of what I said in Aspen, is we need to combine climate, equity, and health goals and metrics and integrated planning to maximize the resources in our city. So for example, the Department of Public Works is really the department that oversees water, sanitation, street services, paving streets, street lights, etc. But then we have Rick and Parks that creates open space, stormwater solutions, bioswales. They plant a lot of trees. They maintain lots of trees. So Rec and Parks is actually a big part of climate mitigation and climate adaptation, even though they're a different department. And then there are, you know, the Emergency Management Department and the Los Angeles Fire Department. And that's the public safety aspect of extreme heat, where these three departments are working, the EMD, LAFD, and my office are working together to attempt to deploy more resources for emergency response for heat events to minimize deaths and hospitalizations during extreme heat. Plus, my division is working with the Bureau of Engineers, public libraries, and Rec and Parks to increase the number of cooling centers and resilience centers that we have. We do have an urban forest officer who's working closely with our Bureau of Street Services to improve the equitable planting of tree canopy where it's most needed throughout the city. We've got some really great mapping that was done by USC, academics, Google, to identify where tree canopy was lacking most in the city and where we have the greatest opportunity to plant strategically the kinds of trees that we need, because as you all know too, you know, these palm trees may be considered iconic to some in LA, but they do nothing for our climate. They do nothing to mitigate heat. And in fact, I hope that multiple jurisdictions recognize that, you know, it may be a nice Hollywood symbol of what people want to see as Los Angeles, but it is not, you know, native to LA. And speaking of native to LA, we can't just have native plants and native trees anymore. Lots of botanists and geologists have been stating that we need to study trees that can thrive in hotter weather if we wanted to think about the future, because LA is going to get hotter. Even if we include more nature-based solutions and tree canopy and cool roofs and cool buildings, decarbonized buildings, decarbonized transportation. There are multiple fronts in which we need to work just to arrest the worst possibilities of climate change in Los Angeles. Because I know we all want a livable, walkable, public transportation friendly city so that we can continue to enjoy the weather and being outdoors, going hiking, going running, exercising. Those are all, you know, reasons lots of us live in Los Angeles or have moved to Los Angeles, because it's supposedly one of the most temperate weathers in the world. But we know that if we don't begin to address these inequities and address them quickly, that LA will not be that livable, walkable city for all. I'm looking at the time, it's 12:25. What I had suggested to George is that I stop early so that he can ask me a few questions that may have emerged in the chats or that he might have before you show the video, so that we have time for me to respond to some questions. And I guess I just want you to know that my approach at the City of LA is one of collaboration and coordination. I report both directly to the mayor's office and to the city council and to the Board of Public Works. I'm also the executive director for the Climate Emergency Mobilization Commission. And I work very closely with frontline communities. They help me design and facilitate and outreach our Climate Equity LA series. They've been instrumental, and I invite everyone to participate in that Climate Equity LA series in the future. I think we're going to start it again in March. So thank you, George. I'll stop for a minute and you can ask me any questions that you'd like.
Oh, thank you, Marta. Actually, I'm scribbling away here on my piece of paper because when we had you last year and we discussed this issue, one of the things that actually came up was low-income people, retired people living in wooden houses in East LA and South Central that don't have air conditioning. And of course, from a climate point of view, adding air conditioning to the grid, adding to the electrical demand to run those air conditioners is, in a sense, one step forward, two steps backward. But we've seen a lot of advances made in what are called heat pumps, which I guess are really not air conditioning. Can you elaborate on ways in which the city is trying possibly to provide that kind of technology for low-income people?
Sure. So the Department of Water and Power, as you know, is the public utility for the city of Los Angeles. And they have this initiative called Cool LA. And in that Cool LA website, they have lots of information on rebates, and sometimes in certain situations, giveaways to ensure that people have access to air conditioning. We are trying to promote the heat pumps, obviously, but in addition to the heat pumps, the concept of passive cooling, and not just what materials and equipment we use to cool down a home, but the surrounding built environment. So, for example, we know that if you have trees or tree canopy or shade structure surrounding your home, that your energy burden is less in the summertime. I have a tree in front of my house, and I know that really helps cool down my home in the summertime. And so it's really critically heat pumps. I'm not a mechanical engineer here, but I'm going to try to state what they are. Basically, heat pumps have a technology that uses the air that's hot and expels it, and then it maintains the temperature at a cool level when it's hot. And when it's cold, what it does is it increases the hot air inside, and it expels the cold air. So I would definitely, want you to refer to the information we have at LADWP, and I can definitely get some experts there to talk about the technology of a heat pump, but it is definitely advanced over air conditioning systems, and it uses a lot less energy as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's there were interesting conversations going on in the chat, people discussing, for example, the virtues of different kinds of trees, like a Moreton Bay fig. David Bolio has one of those. And do not, I think sometimes people rip out ficus trees because they don't like what the roots do to the sidewalk or their driveways. But ficus trees are, as we have in my building, really do keep the patio of my building quite cool.
Yeah.
I guess we're underscoring that heat pumps are not compressors the way that your refrigerator or your air conditioning unit works. And therefore, yes, uses a lot less energy. Andrew Walser has pointed out that there are actually building codes that make installing heat pumps a bit of a challenge. I did not know that. Are we able to update our building codes in California to keep up with more sustainable technologies? I don't know.
Yes. Yes. In fact, right now, the Department of Building and Safety has been instructed to reform our codes and provide regulatory language to ensure that we can integrate the goals of passive cooling and modern equipment that doesn't exacerbate the climate crisis and uses excessive fuels or refrigerants, or like you said, compressors that use too much energy, right? So yes, that is at play right now. And I think what the major challenges are existing buildings, because obviously they're all connected to gas systems. Obviously, they are the least energy efficient buildings that we have, but also where we have the majority of our affordable housing and low income communities. So that has been a challenge for all cities, not just the city of LA, of how we make that transition affordable for those older buildings, because everybody deserves a healthy, low carbon home, right?
Right. Well, there's interesting questions in the chat as well, or actually one person asked, how can a person participate in tree planting? I want to underscore our newsletter, which just came out last week, or earlier this week, and we have an article in there on Cindy Montañez, who is the CEO of Tree People. And while she's been CEO of Tree People has focused a lot on communities of color, working class communities that have no trees. So I encourage people to check out their calendar, because there are many events in which you can participate in tree planting and in how to maintain the trees that are already there. Marta, I had an interesting, in watching your interview with Aspen, you mentioned your own biography, that your family heritage, like many Latinos in California, maybe could have been your parents or grandparents, actually worked outdoors. They worked in agriculture. They worked in very, very difficult work. And today we're seeing a big contrast between, for example, Greg Abbott in Texas saying, no more water breaks in the middle of the hottest, I think the city of Houston is pushing back. It's just wanton cruelty that it comes from Greg Abbott. But that's a serious point that you've made about people who work outside are really vulnerable. And it doesn't have to be that you're unhoused and sitting on a hot sidewalk. You could be paving a street. You could be working in construction. You could be picking fruit. Are there measures in California to protect people who work outside from excessive heat?
There's minimal measures right now for protecting outdoor workers and even indoor workers. So there is legislation at play at the state level that would go farther to protect outdoor and indoor workers. And the same is true for the federal level. I think we have Senator Alex Padilla as a champion of creating better federal standards for outdoor workers, which is what we would need for Texas, right? But I think California is one of the more advanced, even so, because people like my father, when he was a farm worker, many are undocumented. Those numbers have been historically undercounted, right? For not just for farm workers, but for gardeners, construction workers who are undocumented. The deaths that are caused by not just extreme heat, but other injuries have been historically undercounted. So we definitely need federal standards for whatever your immigration status is, to ensure that employers are being responsible for the life. It's really a human rights issue, and I think that is something that the state and the federal government really want to address. So if you I think his name is Enrique Huerta from Climate Resolve, is an advocate for that state legislation. And I would look up Enrique Huerta Climate Resolve, because he's been the one that's talking to me about the legislation that's at play. I can't remember the codes right now, but I do know that it's at play, and we all should be supporting it. And I do agree with your recommendation of Tree People. The only thing is, if you want to plant trees in the city of LA, Tree People really concentrates on county and unincorporated areas of LA County. Whereas if you want to plant trees for the city of LA, I would definitely look up our City Plants program for the city of LA. And Rachel Malerich is our urban forest officer. We have a forest advisory committee as well. And feel free to reach out to me, and I could put you in touch with the folks at the city. Office of Community Beautification also often plants trees for the city of LA, and there's often tree giveaways. But what we have found, just so you know, you can't just give away trees and expect people to plant them and take care of them. That has not been helpful. As much as we would have liked. We need to be strategic with our investments for tree planting. So if you're talking about being helpful with strategic investments for tree planting, we can definitely point you in the right direction for that. And I think somebody else is asking about federal money available, credits, refunds. Yeah, all that information, you should be able to find it on the Cool LA website as well. But absolutely agree that we should all take advantage of that funding, even though it's been difficult to navigate and difficult to understand. And somebody asked about the grants for funding trees. LA got about, there was an LA Times article, the United States Department of Agriculture gave away about $50 million. And LA got about 11 million of that. Tree People got 8 million of that. So
Right.
definitely
Right.
Tree People got more money than the city of LA to plant trees throughout LA County. And they have a big, we have a big territory to cover, and they have a big territory to cover. So I congratulate Tree People for getting that big USDA grant. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting to note that some people are pointing out that once you have the trees, you have to maintain them. And I think one of the advantages that many of these agencies have is that they do teach people how to maintain the trees that are already there. I remember working with Tree People in Pacoima years ago on Van Nuys Boulevard. They had planted the original trees, but they wanted to teach people how to prune them, how to watch if they're healthy, how to see if there's a disease in the tree, and all that matters to preserve all the work and all the advantages. One of the questions is about, we've actually had visitors in my class from the La Crête Center, which is the LADWP, incubator downtown, and their job was to paint surfaces white, including streets. So they came in and showed us. My question is, does that make a measurable difference other than it might be nicer to see something other than asphalt?
Are you talking about cool pavements and cool steel?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. You really want to hear my take on that?
Yes.
Okay, I'll tell you. Scientifically speaking, the jury is still out on whether or not that will have a significant impact on the urban heat island effect. Nothing has demonstrated that will actually improve our urban heat island effect. On the other hand, and you don't want to completely discount it, especially for, I would say, near school grounds, playgrounds, small pocket parks, where for whatever reason you don't want to landscape with vegetation or trees. You want like a even playing field of some sort. I think that's far better than what we have now in our schools, right? For our kids to play on. Although I would like to see a lot more nature in our schools, a lot more trees and vegetation and gardens in our schools. So it's always a multi-faceted approach. You never want to use one tool, you want to use multiple tools. So if you can imagine, I don't know, like a park area, what do you want to see most in that park? You wouldn't want to see cool pavement, right? You would want to see natural landscape, more trees, but maybe you have a skate park and maybe you have a place for people to run. There you could use the cool pavement because unfortunately in the daytime, the cool pavement radiates out the heat. So it actually gets hotter for the pedestrians, for the people that are walking on top of it. What it does is at night, it cools the surface down. And like I said, I think a lot more research has to be done. Beth Abels provided, what did you,
It's
I'm sure.
LA
Sorry, that's just the LA Sanitation's tree giveaway.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yes, LA Sanitation has that tree giveaway program, I think with city plants. Be that as it may, I think the jury's still out. Cool roofs, however, are in a different category. And why? Because when they radiate the heat out during the hottest period of the day, it's not affecting pedestrian temperature or people that they're not walking on top of it. And number two, it's been tested and tried, and it does reduce the energy burden of homes. So it has the positive effect of reducing the energy burden of homes if it's a hot day, it's a hot season, a hot week. So I definitely do recommend cool roofs. But what I want to see is a multifaceted approach so we need more bus shelters, we need more shade structures, we need more tree canopy, we need more vegetation, we need more bioswales, we need more open space, and we need it equally across the city. And we need to target those investments first and foremost in the areas that don't have them. If you want to accelerate, I believe, climate solutions, you have to accelerate those solutions first and foremost for the areas that have the least, because we have the greatest opportunity to reduce greenhouse gas emissions there. And the deaths and the hospitalizations, which is where the biggest numbers come from, right? So, if you look at a blue zone where they have walkable streets, tree canopy, parks, hydration stations, bus shelters, we want that for every community. Every community in Los Angeles, and I'm sure across the nation. There should have never been a disparity between our neighborhoods, but we are stuck in this century correcting that historical disinvestment. And it would have really helped arrest a lot of the climate issues that we have today in the inner city. I'll stop there.
Well, it's important that you point that out, because the EPA article that I shared earlier during the intro actually points to the history of what you just mentioned, sort of historical disinvestment or lack of investment. They actually take us to the history of redlining in Los Angeles and the extent to which working class neighborhoods that are mostly people of color, were redlined by banks in mortgages and so on. So the disinvestment is on that level. It's on the level of to what extent city agencies pay attention to their neighborhoods and in fact do plant trees. In our own LACCD, it's been pointed out in the chat, and it is a bit of a problem, is that we have facilities, and we actually, for the campuses that are in the San Fernando Valley that have a lot of green space, it actually takes a lot of effort, money, and employment to have facilities take care of the trees. So when we planted about 7 crepe myrtles at Valley College, only one survived, and I'm seeing that at City College, I think one of their trees survived. So that that brings up the issue of it's not just enough to dig a hole and plant a sapling. The maintenance, the watering, etc. And we probably have to find more ingenious ways in our district for faculty and students to take some of the pressure off facilities and to monitor the trees and even water them. I know that the fire station across the street on Burbank from our very, very famous Morton Bay fig, they took care of the Morton Bay fig during the drought, and they would bring water from the firehouse and watered it, and it's alive and well today. So yes, trees do need people, and people need trees, to quote.
Yeah, and I want to point out something about maintenance too. Recently, the city of LA hired a Bureau of Street Services director who really believes that we need to fund maintenance within the capital side of the budget, right? We have capital investments, and we never include maintenance in those capital investments. If we included maintenance budget up front in the capital investments for the 10, 20, 30 years that we need to take care of that tree until it thrives on its own, then we would have many more thriving trees in every city. We now also have a capital infrastructure director in the chief administrative office. We have an equity index at the city of LA, which includes climate metrics. And we have my position, and all these new offices are meant to ensure that we experience greater accountability and greater efficiencies with regards to our climate infrastructure investments and services, right? So it's a new day, but it's gonna take a while. And I think we're the only city, however, that has all these new efforts that can really make us successful and align with Justice 40, which I'm sure you've talked about in your discussions too. It's a federal initiative by the Biden-Harris administration to invest no less than 40% of the federal dollars that they give cities into these historically disinvested areas. The problem is cities do not have a way to track those metrics. Not really. So, but with LA's equity index and with our new capital climate infrastructure czar and me, and then putting all the general managers on that same wavelength of measuring their investments in this specific area, then we can report on outcomes for Justice 40 as intended, right? And then the federal government is also coming up with its own data tools. We have some of those on our website. I could put our website here so that you guys can look at the resources that we have. And then if there's resources here that we don't show that you think we should, feel free to send that information to me, and I'll put my email right here. Oh, no, that's not it. Marta Segura at LA City. I was going to give you my personal.
That's the one that's climate4la.org, right?
That's our that's our city website, climate4la.org.
Because one of the questions was actually, and I don't know if you can address this, I know we're out of time, but can you identify where in the city the programs are already underway in coping with or confronting the heat island effect? We'll have people, experts coming up that are going to show us the problem and the demographics and the data, but it's a good question. Where can we see this underway in Los Angeles now?
Okay. So right now, I just stated in the chat space, we just allocated $50 million for bus shelters to put them in areas that are heavily transited, heavily trafficked, where people like in Boyle Heights, Koreatown, and other hot pots and hot spots of the city will be able to see these bus shelters. We had a 10-year plan, but I think this accelerates our 10-year plan, this $50 million investment. We also allocated at least $50 million for city building decarbonization. And we're prioritizing city buildings that are public serving, like libraries, rec and park centers, because we're also using those as heat cooling centers and resilience centers. So I hope everybody here knows that when it gets really hot and if you don't have AC, you can go into any public library. Most are open on weekends, some are open on Sundays. But if we have a heat wave, we will alert you to the conversion of those libraries and rec and park centers as augmented cooling centers, which means they're also open on Sundays and holidays and at night. So people can go there after work. And normally when city buildings are closed, we're going to have those open, but there's a specific number throughout the city that we will open. So those are just a few things. And then I mentioned our urban forest officer and her proposed strategy to plant more trees in these areas without tree canopy. Of course, we have the new building code, new building legislation, where all new buildings that come up in the city of LA must be decarbonized, meaning they won't have any gas connections. We're working on an existing building strategy where we can hopefully subsidize, finance, or identify funding to ensure that these older buildings and their owners aren't heavily burdened. Because what happens when you heavily burden these landlords, they sell their buildings to a corporation, and the corporation, basically displaces all the tenants, and the tenants no longer have a place to live. So we want to avoid unintended consequences of these climate solutions. I've learned from the past. I hope we've all learned from those lessons. And I'm also kind of an internal city watchdog. When I see something that I believe is going to have an unintended consequence, I share that opinion with my colleagues. So that we don't. And that's exactly what happened with building decarbonization. When the city council wanted to pass a building decarbonization policy for all buildings, we said, slow down. We need to really evaluate this before we do that, because it would just create more homelessness. Right. It would create more poverty, and poverty perpetuates climate chaos. So there's a balance that we need to make as we're transitioning into a future that's healthier for all, more equitable for all, and climate friendly for all, right? So, yeah.
That's smart, because you're absolutely right. The unintended consequences part, right? Where we think we're doing something very green and very environmental, but in fact, socially, it has a very opposite repercussions for people that are not on the more affluent side of the demographic curve. There was an interesting question brought about the San Fernando Valley, because one of the things we know is that the heat in LA is very different. You live in Santa Monica, it's a nice 69 degrees. You go to Woodland Hills and it's 95, and it's the same day. So I know now people in Woodland Hills are saying, you see what it's like to live in Woodland Hills? But I guess they're curious about San Fernando Valley. I think we could probably look at that on your on the maps that you'll be offering, and some of the websites that you've offered. because it is part of the city of Los Angeles. So we would also, of course, benefit from that. We're greener. The San Fernando Valley is when you fly over it, you see lots of trees. It isn't a frying pan the way that some schoolyards are. So we have some very good possibilities for improving the tree canopy in the San Fernando Valley. Maybe more of a challenge in those wall-to-wall concrete.
Yeah, and I do want to correct my statement on poverty perpetuating climate chaos. When a city disinvests in a neighborhood and therefore creates the scenario for poverty, that exacerbates the climate chaos, because we don't have tree canopy, because we don't have vegetation, because we don't have open space. So the people who are poor, they don't perpetuate that chaos. The governments that disinvest in solutions perpetuate that chaos, right? Because we all know that Beverly Hills and their lawns, and the richer you are and the wealthier you are a bigger consumer, and in that scenario, I would say it contrasts what I said. So maybe the way I said it was absolutely wrong. I meant to say when we disinvest in communities, that perpetuates the climate chaos.
Good, very good point, Marta. I know you have to go. It's been wonderful having you, even if it's been not exactly a full hour, but we've learned so much. And I think, urging people to look in the chat to see all the links that are being provided. This has really been a great follow-up to what we did last year, where all we talked about was heat stroke. And now we've really brought up the issues of equity and climate justice, which are central to success. So once again, thank you very, very much. It's been really gratifying to have you explain things to us. And what we're going to do as an outro is I'm actually going to show people your Aspen Institute interview.
Awesome. Great. I haven't seen it, by the way, so if you want to send it to me later, I'd be great.
Okay.
I think I'll step away because I'll probably just cringe through the whole video.
No, it's the two of you sitting there with a fantastic landscape of Aspen, Colorado. So the background is breathtaking.
Beautiful. I'm so glad. Thank you all so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Marta.
Please reach out when you need to. All right. Take care.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Well, we really have a whole lot going on there in the chat, and I'm hoping people will scroll through it and see there's lots of links and updates and even discussions and conversations, everything from which species of tree are, the most shade providing. And it was good to hear from Marta that it's not about all native species, and that our iconic palm trees are also not native. So there is the poll, I think, that Beth has launched in this Zoom meeting. So don't go away, because I want to share with you Marta's interview. It's an easy poll. It's not the same thing as the survey we're asking faculty to fill out that we start our opening day, which is more about the SEI and all of our functions. So with that, I'm going to return to my PowerPoint, let's see. Here it goes.
My name is Zoya Tirstein. I'm a reporter for the environmental magazine Grist. I'm here with Marta Segura, the Chief Heat Resiliency Officer for the City of Los Angeles. I want to talk about, since it's a festival of big ideas, I want to talk about heat as an idea. I know there's an official definition of excessive heat, which is, combination of humidity and temperatures above the average, but heat also has a personal impact on people. And I'm wondering what that personal impact is for you. What is your association? What is your definition of heat?
Well, I think, as I was growing up, I heard stories from my father and mother, because my dad worked in the farms, my mother worked in the cannery. And so there were women fainting, men fainting, from exhaustion, from heat exhaustion, dehydration, no breaks. So that left an impression on me. So my first interest in this is the worker health and safety, right? And that's why I have my master's degree in public health and worker health, safety, and environmental health. But now I realize the impact is so much greater than workers. It's vulnerable communities that live in historically disinvested communities where the pollution burden is greater, where there's more chronic illness, and because of that, they suffer the greatest ER visits and excess deaths during heat waves. So we want people to know that heat waves are longer, they have more intensity, they're more frequent, so our bodies are less able to recover. And so if you have any vulnerability that I mentioned or others, then that makes you more at risk for being hospitalized or having those preventable deaths. So we want to prevent that. We want to stop that. It's a life and death situation, and we think it can be helped, and we think we can do something about it.
Yeah, I think of heat as one of the most visceral climate impacts. There's a lot of climate impacts that are a little more subtle.
Yeah.
It's just, it like wallops you, you know?
Yeah.
There's no way to ignore it.
Exactly.
What brought you, so I mean, Chief Heat Resiliency Officer, I think that's something that people wouldn't normally associate as with being a job that's common out there in the
That's right.
world. How did that come to be, and how new is the position?
Well, first I was a founding climate emergency mobilization officer for the city.
Okay.
And a year later, the city council wanted to stop the deaths in the city, right? So they're like, this is unacceptable. We need to designate a chief heat officer. So they did a search and they're like, well, since it's LA's primary climate hazard, why not have Marta Segura also be our chief heat officer? So that's how I came to this dual role of chief heat officer, resilience, as you said, and also climate emergency mobilization director. So I think because LA is #1 in the nation for risk from extreme heat, as defined by FEMA, we have such density in the urban setting. Our urban heat island, combined with pollution, affects more people. So I don't know if you noticed, but when you have a heat wave and you combine it with pollution, you stagnate that air pollution and it stays that breathing level. And so these people who have these predispositions, chronic illnesses, are the ones that end up being hospitalized, right? So that's preventable if we have more cooling centers, resilience centers. We have more tree canopy, more shade equity. We have more open space like you have here in Aspen. You know, our urban core, the historically disinvested areas, have hardly any trees at all, have hardly any open space. So we're trying to transform all of that so that we have healthy, thriving communities for everyone.
You've got a tricky situation in LA where you have a lot of urban sprawl, you have car culture, you have a lot of disinvested communities, as you've noted, and some lack of urban green space as well. So you said they brought you in to kind of prevent deaths. Has that happened? Have you succeeded in that endeavor?
We looked at the numbers for the people who came to our cooling centers last year, and more people came to our cooling centers last year than ever before. And it was in areas like South LA and low-income areas of the San Fernando Valley. And we think that's because we had more promotion, we had more engagement, we had a campaign. And you can't count a life that you've saved in this short period of time. That's why I'm pushing for better climate health and equity data. But I do know that more people came for that refuge. And the CDC studies demonstrate that if people who are at risk come for just 3 hours to a cooling center or resilience center, that can prevent hospitalization and death and heat exhaustion and heat stroke. So we know it's a short-term solution. The long-term solution is creating healthier homes for everyone that are heat adapted, that have thermal cooling, that have passive cooling materials. So the city of LA is considering existing building decarbonization policy. We've already passed a new building decarbonization policy. So all those new buildings will be, weatherized, have great cooling materials, heat pumps, everything that you need in everyone's home to adapt to this kind of extreme heat. So those are some of the things that we're doing to prevent those deaths and hospitalizations.
I'm just thinking that
So I'm pausing it there. We're almost at the halfway point of this Aspen Institute interview. And I'm looking at the clock, and we don't like to go over. The entire interview will be posted on our website. And also, I want to mention that we actually have a Canvas, a set of modules on Canvas for faculty to use, that we're adding to that more and more the content of some of these seminars, so that they're available to faculty to use in lecture material. They're all open, easy to clone, copy, and otherwise incorporate into lectures, not just science lectures, but consider that this is urban development, urban planning, public health, transportation. So we emphasize very much in the Sustainable Environment Institute that climate literacy and climate education should not be limited to a strictly scientific approach. Now, that said, we do have the honor, I think, the coming up event where a group of scientists at Caltech will have crunched a lot of data for us, and we'll get into what Marta was referring to there. You can't manage what you can't measure is an old cliche, and fortunately, Caltech has done a lot of that measurements, which then allows policymakers to focus on those particularly hard-hit areas. So it would love to get access to this canvas. I think it's shared. I think it's published, or some of the modules are published. I'll ask my colleagues, and
sorry, George. I'm going to put my email. I'll put my email in the chat here, and please email me if you want access.
Perfect. Thank you, Beth.
The canvas.
So with that, I'm looking at my list to making sure I haven't left anything out. The poll, the survey. This is all recorded, and it will be shared with everybody as soon as we're able to post it on our SEILACCD.net. That's right over here. And we do maintain it. Our newsletter is out, and you can click on that and see that we have this event and upcoming events featured there. So thank you all very much for attending today's seminar on urban heat islands, and the pleasure of having Marta Segura again share what's going on in the city of Los Angeles. So there are some updates. I didn't want to end it quite yet until I'm sure people have posted everything they wanted in the chat. Access to the canvas, and there's Beth's email, and also there is West LA has a faculty member that's also sharing their email there. So with that, thank you very much for attending today's seminar, and we will see you again in October for Climate Palooza and for our Caltech science team on urban equity and heat. So with that, I'm going to end the meeting, and I hope you all have a very good weekend.